And and John Shearer was the drummer, and excellent drummer, and he had a stainless steel drum kit, and he always insisted that Mick, his roadie, when he was touching the kit and moving it, he had to wear white gloves so that he didn't get finger marks on it, So I can kind of get that. He was a perfectionist about his instruments. So Mick toasted sandwiches throughout.
Why working during the night and not working during the day? Why the shift?
I honestly don't know. I assume it was maybe the studio was being used by other people.
That's right. Yeah.
I honestly don't know. But it was fun anyway. I mean, when you're that young, you don't mind staying up all night and making music.
And sleep during the day. Yeah. Sometimes, somebody will know the person in charge of the studio, and they will charge you half the fee to go night. So it's convenient, sometimes it's free. And so.
You'd have to ask Steve about that. Yeah.
And in the 80s, feel free to elaborate with you. You work with Symbiosis. How did the band form, and what was the idea?
Symbiosis, yeah. Well, that was an interesting one. That was through a friend. I met a guy called Clive Williamson, and he was a studio manager. He worked at the BBC, basically, on the technical side. So he was what we call a studio manager. And so, of course, he was there while they were making radio programs. And sometimes people would say, oh, you know what, we need a Spanish theme here, or we need some flute music or something. And he'd started doing some recording at his place. He had a nice little home studio with some very, very good equipment, really lovely top-class microphones. And he was very, very good with using reverb. So he got some lovely flute sounds. So basically, we got quite a few jobs doing music, theme tunes for Radio 4 programs. So this is BBC Radio 4. And in fact, there was one that we did, which was called Just Three Wishes, which I wrote the theme tune for, which I hoped would make my fortune. I was hoping it would run and run, but sadly it didn't. But there we are. That's life, isn't it? Anyway, we did a lot of theme tunes, but then we also did some albums. Clive was very into the idea of using music for, and still is, into the idea of using music for relaxation. And there was research done showing how music can affect the heart rate and the body. And if you listen to calming music, it will help calm you down. So that was part of the idea. So he'd come up with these backings, and I would turn up. So because he played a bit of keyboards, and so I'd turn up at his place, and he'd put down this backing, sometimes with a long drone note underneath and bits of percussion, and I would just improvise for, I won't say hours, but anyway, a long time. I'd just do these great long improvisations, and then I'd go home, and then after that, he would edit what I'd done and take the best bits and throw away the bits that weren't so good. And he'd send me these recordings, and I was amazed at how well some of them turned out. So we did a number of albums like that, and we also did a few gigs as well with Ashley Drees and Rick Bolton, and a guy called Malavir, I think, joined us for a few. So we did a few gigs in around. We were never a touring band as such, because Clive had his job at the BBC. But then sadly he left the BBC, and the job's dried up for doing that. But that's the way these things work. But I did actually learn a lot about just the use of recorded sound with Clive, because he was so good, because he was a studio manager and he really knew about production. He had an excellent ear, or does have an excellent ear, for getting really, really good flute sounds, particularly because I always like, with my flute sound, nearly always, it depends. If it's a very fast piece, it's not the case, but if it's a long, slow melody, I do like to have some reverb and a bit of repeat echo on it. That it's the sort of thing you would get if you were playing in a very large church or a cathedral. That's how a flute sounds, and that's how I like the flute to sound. I don't like it if it's too kind of dry sounding. And as I say, Clive was was absolutely terrific at getting these lovely kind of rolling sounds. And I, did some alto flute for him and some bass flute as well. And we put together quite a few albums which are still available.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Symbiosis.
Those are masterpieces. Yeah. Those are masterpieces. And then some years on the road, you end up doing a duet album with your brother again. I think it's called Sketches of the Satie. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Sketches of Satie. Yeah, that's going quite a way, and that was in 2000.
2000, correct? Yeah. How the idea come about and the project and
we'd always loved Eric Satie. For anybody that doesn't know, was a French composer. He was a contemporary of Debussy, so he lived in Paris the end of the 19th century you're looking at, and he was quite an influence on Debussy. He wrote a number of pieces. When he was young, he wrote perhaps some of his best pieces, interestingly, because later in life he went on to study harmony and counterpoint. And I've always thought that some of his earlier pieces, like the Trois Gymnopédies, as they're called, and the Nocienne, which are earlier pieces, are actually some of his better ones. But anyway, that's another story, really. But we always loved his music anyway. So we used to have, when I was talking about the old days when we were living in a flat in Victoria as teenagers, Steve came home one day with this album called The Music of the Velvet Gentleman, so called because he used to wear these velvet corduroy suits. This Eric Satie used to wear these velvet corduroy suits. He was a bit eccentric. He had 7 of them, all identical, and he just sort of wore them in rotation. And on this album was a recording of the Trois Gymnopédies, which we absolutely loved. Absolutely gorgeous piece. In fact, I think Blood, Sweat and Tears did a version of it as well. It had some fantastic flute playing on it, which inspired me by an English flute player called William Bennett. So we'd always loved the music of Satie, and so Steve came up with this idea: why don't we do a duo album? And so we put this together with Steve taking because originally most of the pieces were written for the piano. So I took the top line, the melody, and Steve played the piano part, transcribing it onto the guitar. So it was quite a big project to take on. We had some help from a friend of mine, Sally Goodworth, who's a pianist that I was working with. So she was able to sketch out lay down the piano parts just to start with as a basis, and we worked from there. So, but yeah, Satie was quite a character. There's all sorts of stories about him, but apparently he only ever had one girlfriend in his life, Suzanne Valadon, I think she was called, and they got into a fight one night, and he threw her out the window, which not a nice thing to do. But fortunately, she was a trained acrobat and landed on her feet and skipped off into the night.
Oh man! Anyway. Crazy story. Some years on the road. I'm sorry.
There's all sorts of stories about him, But he spent much of his life. He was actually very poor, and I think he bought these 7 velvet corduroy suits when he came into a bit of money, but it soon got spent. He was very generous. He was always sort of taking his friends out for drinks, and he ended up. Well, I say he ended up. No, at one point he was living in something called like Le Placard. I think it was just the cupboard. So it was a room that was so small you could just sort of, if you could get the door open, you then had to climb onto the bed to sort of get into the room. It was just tiny, but it was very cheap. So that was how he was able to get by.
Oh, amazing story. And some years on the road, you end up putting together the Hacktrax record label. How the idea arose and how what was the purpose of that?
Yeah, well, that was after I moved up here because I live now in Sheffield, which is north of London. It's about 3 hours drive from London. We moved up here, and I had a complete sort of change. Really, I'd had a difficult time because I'd had an injury to my back and my neck, and I just felt like I needed a complete change. So we moved from where we were, which was in Aylesbury, and we moved up here. and I wanted to start something new. And so we started up, just like a lot of people do, have done, is just a self-publishing means of getting your music out there. So I did an album called Velvet Afternoon, which was pieces for flute and piano, but they were original. So they're pieces that I had written. And I recorded that with Satie Goodwith, who I just mentioned. And I'd done a lot of the groundwork for it by, I used to, when we lived in Aylesbury, there was a canal there, and I used to wander up and down the canal with, in those days, it was like a handheld dictaphone, as we called it. These days you'd record it on your mobile phone, but I just wanted some sort of mobile recording device, and I just walk up and down the canal, and I'd be singing little tunes to myself, and then I'd come home and then turn them into, pieces, adding harmony and everything. And Sally would make up piano parts to go with my melodies, and we put a whole album together, which again involved Clive Williamson. He did the recording of that and did a very good job on the recording and editing of it. And then from then we went on and put out other albums. In more recent years, I've worked with my guitarist friend Nick Fletcher, who's the fantastic lead guitarist in the John Hackett band. And Nick and I put out some classical albums. Overnight Snow was one of them, The Hills of Andaluthia. He's also done some solo albums, some solo guitar albums that we put out on Hacktrax. So it's just a way of, it can be very difficult to get record deals and organize it and everything. And it was just a really nice way of being in control of, your creativity.
Yeah. Have you ever been involved? And I think Anthony Phillips did a lot that create music for commercial TV. People create like a library, and they end up selling the library to I don't know.
No, I haven't really.
Soundtrack where they can be used. No.
The only time that I got close to anything like that was when, as I say, when Clive Williamson was working at the BBC with Symbiosis. So that's back in the early 80s. I've not done anything like that. Oh, I did once do some music for a documentary film, actually. That was back in the 80s as well. Yes, I did do a soundtrack with a guy called Graham Pleath, a keyboard player. We did do but that's all. It would be an interesting thing to do. If somebody asked me, I'd be interested. It's just, it's just there's always so many other things going on, and I've spent a lot of my life teaching as well. So it's always a question of how you find time to do things. So.
Do you do you teach like a formal classes on a university, or you teach?
No. I was always just a flute teacher, as it were, just giving lessons on the flute. So not a class teacher, but in the early 80s, I was what we call a peripatetic, which means you go around to different schools and you just give flute lessons to mostly school children. I have taught some adults. I've taught all ages, and I'm a great believer that anyone can make some kind of progress on the flutes if they. I've never taught anybody that couldn't eventually get a sound out of it. Sometimes people say, "Oh, I haven't got the right shaped lips," or but usually it's just a question of being patient and just trying and finding a way for somebody to start to make a sound. So. And I enjoyed teaching. I don't teach these days, but I enjoyed my time teaching. I always felt it was something very, very worthwhile. You kind of come home after a day's work and you think you've done something that's useful for the world. And so, although I wasn't trying to turn out professional flute players, but the idea is simply to, as you were saying about your love of music, just to give people an insight into, what music can mean, and certainly for younger people as well. I think it's a fantastic thing when they start to learn an instrument and then play, in a wind band or an orchestra. or whatever it is. I think you learn a lot by interacting with other people and learning, that there are times when you do need to shut up and be quiet, and then other times when you need to step forward and project your sounds. And that whole sort of working together is something that is often, I mean, I don't know what it's like in the States these days, because you do have a very strong tradition of music in schools, don't you? But certainly in this country, with all the cuts and everything in education, music does tend to get sidelined, unfortunately. And there are fewer, I should say, children learning musical instruments, I think. I mean, there's always interest in, kids learning the guitar and the drums and all that. That's great. But some of the orchestral instruments, particularly, numbers are well down. And state schools generally these days struggle to get a school orchestra. I mean, some of the private schools, still, will have decent school orchestras. But I know a lot of the state schools now that they just don't have enough violinists to make an orchestra. So it's
it's sad.
Changes,
In many schools, or perhaps in society, music in general has like a low priority. I mean, obviously, science and math and English are important.
Yeah.
But some other subjects are pushed away, or budget constraint and what have.
I think it's because it's very difficult to quantify the benefits of that kind of creativity, whether it's music or art or anything like that. It's you can't quantify it in such an easy way, but I do think it's incredibly important, and I'm sorry that it doesn't have the prominence that it used to and that it should have.
Oh, absolutely, and give you a peace of mind, either playing an instrument or listen to music like I do, or music, at least for me, takes me away, relax me, or take me to other places.
It does take you to another place, doesn't it? I think that's it. It takes you outside of yourself and to whatever your belief is, but it's something bigger than yourself.
Absolutely, and in general, classical music, right? All the instruments, the violin, the flute, and so on, trombone are in terms of audience, right? It's going, smaller audience, right? I mean, a rock band can sell a show of 5,000 tickets, but a classical concert or classical guitar, maybe sell 50 or 100, whatever. So
I think that's from what I've read in the States. It's difficult, isn't it? And it's
very difficult. Yeah. So but it needs to come from. I mean, it's not the problem of the state, right? It's, I suppose, it needs to come from the family, right? If your dad or mom or uncle, whatever, music were part of the life, they will bring the little kids to concert or show them a guitar or buy them a record, and it's it's like a family thing, right? It needs to come from within as well, right? So in my case, I was very lucky that I grew up in a family where music was important. I told you, my dad had a lot of music, so it was very important growing up. Although I didn't like his music, I knew that would play an important role in my life. And then when I was 14, I discovered my own thing, and so the rest of kids.
Sorry, you discovered.
And then when I was 14, I sort of discovered my taste of music, right? So and I knew that I like Baroque. I think the first 3 albums that I bought, it would have been either Pan Metheny or Tangerine Dream, that I like electronic music, and probably a Genesis album. Something was 14, and I saved my money and I bought the vinyl, and then remember exactly the day that I knew that music will play an important part of my life. I knew that I didn't have a talent to be a musician or perhaps an interest to read music, but just listening to music, open a vinyl, seeing the picture. That was before the internet, obviously, right? So no social media, YouTube didn't exist. So I was kind of going crazy because in Latin America, bands were not touring. So I will open a, vinyl record from Jean-Luc Ponty, for example, right, which is one of my heroes. And I said, man, this guy is amazing, or this or that. And I couldn't see any shows. Now everybody goes to Latin America, but in 1976 or 77, when I bought my first vinyls, I was going crazy because I wanted to experience seeing a band live.
Yeah, yeah.
Of course, you would play the vinyl, but I wanted to see people around me. I wanted to see a concert, to be part of the audience, participate with the audience. So it's a beautiful thing. Music it gives a lot of satisfaction for every, in life. In 2005, you did your first rock and prog solo album. I think I checked it out of London.
Yes.
How do you put that together, the band and the idea of starting a solo stage and so forth? Feel free to elaborate on that.
Yeah. I'd started to do a bit of songwriting, and I was generally writing rather sort of soppy love songs. They weren't that great, but I'd got a multi-track recorder that when we moved to Sheffield here, I bought this thing, and I was putting down some sort of demos of things, and I played it to a friend of mine. This is Nick Clabban, who I was at school with, and he listened to this stuff. He said, yeah, it's okay, but I think I need to write some lyrics for you. So he started sending me lyrics, and that was great. It was quite a game changer, because then instead of these rather sort of drippy love songs that I was not, there's anything wrong with love songs, but they're all a bit similar. So Nick started sending me his lyrics, which of course were much, should we say, darker, very different. He's a completely different personality from me, and for me, that was great, because it was like half the song was already written, because I'd sit down at the piano, I'd have a piece of paper in front of me with all the lyrics, and try a few chords, maybe try it on the guitar as well, because that's the way I write. I switch between the piano and the guitar, depending on if I've run out of ideas on the piano, I'll go to the guitar and then go back. So I started putting these songs together, and we realized that they were sounding much, much better, and did some demos with them. And so I contacted Nick Magnus, who was in my brother Steve's band. So I'd known him from those days, who was not only an excellent keyboard player, but also a very good producer and arranger. And so we started working on the album. And I also, at that time, I met a guy called Tony Patterson, who was the singer in a Genesis tribute band called Regenesis.
Right. Yep.
And I'd seen them here in Sheffield, and I went up and introduced myself and everything. So that was all very nice. And Tony's a terrific singer. So he came to my place and started helping me with the vocals. I did most of the vocals on the album. I'd never actually done any singing before, so it was a real sort of leap in the dark, because I'd not done any singing, but I thought, well, I'll have a go. And, with the help of a bit of technology, a bit of retuning here and there, and Nick Magnus putting the nice sheen on the vocals, I think I managed to get away with it on that album. But Tony was great, because he sang a couple of the lead vocals, like on Ego and Id and Dreamtown. Did a great job on those. And also did a really great job with some backing vocals. He has some really good ideas, so I learned from him. And then, of course, there was my brother Steve, who very kindly came over to Nick's studio and put his lead guitar work on a lot of the album. I mean, I did some of the lead guitar work, but most of it was done by Steve. And that's how the album kind of came about. And I really didn't know what to expect when we put it out. But I was really quite knocked out with the reaction, and it was a much better album than I I thought it would be. I really had no idea, because we'd gone from having these demos that I put together, which weren't particularly good, to Nick Magnus getting hold of them and putting his stamp on them by doing his arrangements of the songs and his production skills. And he did the drums as well. He did them with programmed drums, which I know some people might shy away from, but he did a fantastic job. It's very musical, and I was completely happy with everything that he did. And it was just a very practical way of getting the album out, and we put it out on Hacktrax. I must get it repressed, actually, that album, because it's been out of stock for some time, and I'm often asked about it. And it is an album I'm very proud of, actually. I think we took a lot of care over it. We took a lot of time. It was nearly a year in the making, and I think it shows that we put a lot of care into it. But it was very much the team that put it together.
Yeah. You just said Hacktrax still exists as a record label still?
Yes, it does. If we put something, so it just depends what we've got. I think the last thing we put out was a flute and guitar album that Nick Fletcher and I did, called Goldfinch, which was a series of pieces for Baroque pieces. So Vivaldi. There's a Vivaldi flute concerto called the Goldfinch, and in an arrangement for flute and guitar, actually. So Nick playing all the orchestral parts on the guitar, which is something. But yeah, that was to my knowledge, off the top of my head, I think that's the last thing we put out on Hacktrax. But yeah, I mean, it's.
I will send you about, when was it? About, I don't know, 6 months ago, or I don't know, around Christmas. I don't remember. I interviewed another great musician, a classical guitarist from Italy. I will send you the link for you to check it out.
Yeah.
She's very good, and I think the two of you, it's like the same personality. Will get along. Well, and I think the boyfriend is like a violinist. She's a very good guitarist. But I will send you a link, and you tell me if it's good or not.
I'll be interested to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, she's very good. And then I only have 2 more questions, and then we can do part 2 on Thursday again, right? And then you participated with Nick also in Hexameron and Children of Another God, and from his live your live duet album in 2010, I believe it was the live one, right? Yeah.
Oh yes, so the live album that came about through we did a short tour with The Watch, who are an Italian Genesis tribute band. Though they also original material that I almost to that. Nick and I did a short tour with them, and that album, but the live album grew from that. So it's live takes from. So I was, by that stage, I was a bit more confident with my singing, and so I was singing, playing guitar, and flutes, and Nick was obviously on keyboards. But yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and actually, the Watch, the band, the Italian band, they're going to be playing the Trading Boundaries in October, November. Yeah. Yes,
they are, and if anyone hasn't seen them, go and.
They're very, very good. They're very, very good.
They really are excellent. Yeah.
And I saw a couple of YouTube videos where you're playing flute, and could have been Delamia. Yeah, I think that.
Oh yeah, that was probably during lockdown. I think we did some sharing of files that way, stuff I recorded here and sent over to them. Yeah, but I mean their approach to it is they don't sort of wear the costumes and try and reproduce the shows exactly, but they're musicians and they put their own stamp on it. But it is very faithful to the original spirit of the music. So yeah, I'd certainly warmly recommend anyone going and seeing that.
Yeah, if I have the time, I will fly again. I know I'm going to be flying to the UK in June, somewhere in June. I don't know exactly. I need to coordinate with my wife and my son, but we love going there. It's very expensive, so I need to save money between now and then. So And London is very expensive compared to other cities in in the UK. So
sure.
but I like going there. And the last question of today, feel free to elaborate. I think you mentioned that Tony Patterson, the lead singer of the Genesis tribute, Regenesis. I need to check out the band. I know the name, but I don't know if there are some videos on YouTube to check it out to see, how good they are.
They're very good, and I believe they're still, still going. I haven't seen them recently, I confess, but
yeah. All right, we need to check it out. Thanks, John. We'll do finish part 1, and then we'll continue, on Thursday or Friday when you have done. We do part 2,
okay.
And it was very nice talking to you. And
it's an absolute pleasure.
Hopefully, the internet will come back and be more stable.
Well, yeah, actually, it's not been too bad, has it? All things considered. No. Thank you for your patience with that.
No problem. Take it easy. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay.